Come in, take a seat. There's definitely some empty space. We are competing against the keynote today, so I thank you guys for actually coming to join me to chat a little bit about architecting data using Lightning Platform, Heroku, and MuleSoft kind of in a better together story. My name is Jay Hurst. I'm a product manager with Salesforce on our platform side. I own a lot of our data APIs along with some of our other internal pieces. Now, I do have to give you the forward-looking statement. Since it's 11 o'clock, you probably only have to see this 20 or 30 more times for the conference, but Salesforce is a publicly traded company. Some of the features we're talking about today may be future-looking, and as such, if you're looking to make any purchasing decisions, make those based on what is generally available in the product today and not what is the forward or future-looking statements. We can definitely tag those out as we're going through, and at the end, if there's any questions on what is GA and what's not, we can go through that as well. So what are we going to cover today? First thing we're going to talk about is integration patterns across the Salesforce landscape, specifically on Lightning Platform, and then how we can extend it out to Heroku and MuleSoft. We'll take you through how do you kind of make that transformation from APIs to apps, and really, what can we do to help you prepare for the future as you kind of start to tackle these issues within your own companies? So we've probably seen this a few times, but the story is that every customer is connected. And this is kind of the default today. Everybody expects connectivity. They expect seamless experiences. They expect real-time, fast, accurate notifications when something happens. And they're actually starting to bring that from the consumer space into your business space as well. Your employees are consumers of other technologies, and they want that same experience when they're working in your companies or when they're using their apps for their personal use. And what we're really seeing is that over 3/4 of the customers out there expect this from the brands that they engage with. They are expecting these connected experiences. And in order to bring these connected experiences to your customers, we really have seen that a recent IDC study said that IT shops need to begin to deliver apps 158% more than they have in the past. So you have to build more, quicker, deliver it to your customers faster, and you have to continue to support it in a way that becomes maintainable so you don't fall behind. Because at the end of the day, these integrations are what are powering these custom connected experiences. Uber is a great example. This app, when you load it up, it has a very simple user interface. You say where you're at, you say where you want to go. You'll see a little car come and pick you up, off you're going. But in the background, they're actually talking to dozens of systems. Geolocation to find out where you are and where your driver is. They have your customer data, your secure storage around your credit card and billing information, all of the experiences and past rides that you've done. All of those are connected into that little app that you see on your phone, but as a customer, you don't care about that. Now, Uber and their IT team and development team, they have to care about that a lot. So this is where we really see a lot of the time being spent in market is how do we deliver these integrated experiences in a way that we can give our customers what they need without them having to worry about the bits that move in the back end. But this is very, very hard. Raise your hands if you have more than one system in your enterprise today. Okay, so you've probably started to hit this. I think more than one is an understatement for most enterprises that I've talked to. Usually it's on the order of dozens or hundreds of systems, and oftentimes they're not even systems that you own. You're connecting to other providers and other vendors. So starting to try and unlock these and really link them together becomes a very difficult task. This is the traditional IT space. This is what IT has done, but it is hard. And with the proliferation of apps, it's not necessarily becoming easier. But at Salesforce, we are striving to make sure that when you're integrating with Salesforce, we are making it as easy as possible. This is the customer success platform that you've seen over the past couple days. Probably if you were at Dreamforce last year, you saw this wheel kind of start to fill out. And really what we're going to talk about today is on the bottom right, the integration space, which is Lightning Platform, Heroku, and MuleSoft. And we really feel that this is how we can bring not only the internal Salesforce teams together so that when you're experiencing between Marketing Cloud and core CRM, you can have a seamless experience, but also how do you extend that out to your applications that you're building? How do you extend it to your systems that are internal? And really, we think that with MuleSoft, Heroku, and the Lightning platform together, we can deliver a better experience for you and your customers. We give you the ability to unlock these customer experiences, whether they're behind the Salesforce gate, behind your legacy systems gates, or whether you're trying to build something new on an app dev platform like Heroku. We can integrate that data together to really deliver the point-in-time information that's needed for these apps. And most importantly, it's all built across the trusted platform that Salesforce has worked for the last 20 years to provide you. So everything that we add into these layers is automatically protected with the same level of trust that we've delivered in all of our core features. And what we've seen is by building together in this way, we can actually start to give you over 65% faster app delivery. And it actually compounds, because once you start building and reusing, you're not starting from scratch every time. So instead of building a 100% new app, you only have to build an 80% new app next time. Time after that, maybe it's only 40%. So you're incrementally adding. So we'll go ahead and start with the Lightning platform. How many people have been Salesforce customers for more than 10 years? Okay, a few. How about 5 years? Less than 2 years. Okay, so people that are less than 2 years, you probably haven't seen a whole lot of movement here in the last couple of years. But for those of you that have been here for 10 years, I think we've really started to expand what the platform can do. And it really starts with this idea that we will build something API first, expose it out, and then as we find the value in the right market, we actually bring it closer and closer to the admins to use. So what this means is across Salesforce, you'll find a ton of no-code builders. This is going to be the drag-and-drop app builders, Lightning Flow builders. It's going to be the custom schema editors, all of these things that normally would take a pro developer to build, but we've started to empower the admins to do it. This is something that your admins are able to do. It's kind of second nature for them once they become used to Salesforce, but it's actually a really powerful thing that 20 years ago needed a whole team of devs to do. But we don't stop with no-code builders. We also have a whole suite of pro-code tools to enable your development teams to actually move forward. Now, these are going to be things like VS Code, our Salesforce DX, pipelines. How do we enable team-driven development and source-driven development? And finally, we have a whole suite of enterprise services that power all of these builders and all of these pro-code tools, really completing a nice end-to-end story. So regardless of where your admins, developers, or builders fall in that spectrum, we have a tool that will fit their use case specifically. It also gives you the ability to put your expertise where it belongs. Why have a very expensive architect doing things like creating custom fields? That's not the right place for their expertise anymore. But through this, we're able to build and unlock the power of these apps very fast. I apologize for the size of this slide. My eyes are going bad, so let's step over here. And with these no-code builders, like I said, we have App Exchange, where our partners can deliver shared value and shared apps that you can automatically install into your org. We give you a user experience builder, the Lightning App Builder, so you can create those new pages and those new apps inside of Salesforce. And we have those flow builders, like I mentioned. The pro-code tools, again, Salesforce DX. Open languages on Heroku. Really think of Heroku as that extension of our platform to enable your non-Salesforce developers to interact with Salesforce. If you need to build an application and your team is a Ruby shop or you're a Node shop, you can build that on Heroku and extend it into Salesforce. And reusable code with Lightning Web Components. So the ability to build one type of component that can be used in multiple places across your different builders. A good example is if you have a person record, a contact or a lead, and you want it to be formatted in a specific way, any app that's using it, you can build one Lightning component that can be used across apps that will automatically format it the same way every time. Very simple example. And finally, the enterprise services. Our integration services through Salesforce Connect, our MuleSoft, our enterprise APIs, our ecosystem, our encryption and compliance with Shield, and even our AI services with Einstein. So all of these will give us this nice this nice blend from no code to low code to pro code, so that your builders can, like I said, place in that cycle where it's most appropriate for them. And we continue to drive down these builders, whether it's the user experience, Einstein prediction builder, flow builders, data model builders, and you'll start to see more and more features come into this builder pattern, because that's really what we've seen in the persona world, is you don't really have admins, you don't have developers, you have different stages of builders. You're building an experience, whether it's a user experience, a customer experience, or a development experience. Covered this already, sorry, duplicate slide. But what we get to is this ability to integrate at any layer of your system. So on the left in the green boxes, we have what would be the core data layer. How are you moving data inside of Salesforce, moving it outside of Salesforce, getting your data from somewhere else? We have the process layer, the pink in the middle. This is really how do you kick off business and process-driven methodologies inside of Salesforce and outside of Salesforce. And finally, you have the experience layer. How are you delivering integrated UI experiences through things like Canvas and Lightning Out? Slide that says we do a lot. So we've talked a little bit about what a lot of these services are, but I want to drive in a little bit deeper into each one, just because this is going to, when you're thinking about architecting your data and how you're moving your data and what you're doing with your data, it really kind of is a choice of what is the right tool for what you need to do. First, you have to determine, what do I want to do with this data? Do I want to move it? Do I want to replicate it? Do I want to virtualize it? And once you decide what you want to do with it, then you have a suite of availability of how do you actually get that done. Now, the Salesforce APIs themselves are kind of our lowest layer, if you will, the basis of the integration foundation. So this is a programmatic way for you to interact with your Salesforce data. Every record that gets created in Salesforce ends up being a resource that you can hit using the REST API. You can interact with your meta model via the metadata and the tooling APIs. You can get data in and out via our bulk APIs, SOAP APIs, or even using some of those lower code tools that we have, such as Data Import Wizard, Data Loader, things like that. MuleSoft and Heroku start to bleed in here as well. So kind of at the base layer, we have just core APIs where you can move data in and move data out. On top of there, you start to layer in additional concepts. The first that we introduced in the last couple of years is really about event-driven application. So what we see in a lot of kind of point-to-point integration styles is a model like this. You might have 4 or 5 systems. Every system needs to talk to each other, needs to share data, needs to share processes, and you kind of build these little one-to-one connections. If you have 4 or 5 systems, it's not too bad to manage, although there is overhead. But when you take it to 20 or 30 or 50 or 100 systems and you're making each one of these connections, you end up spending more time maintaining the connections than actually innovating on what you want to do. So decoupling this architecture really gives us this idea of an event-driven pub-sub model. The idea being that every system can publish a signal that says this happened or that happened or I want you to do X, and every other system can listen on those channels independently and then decide what they need to do with that signal. Maybe that means process some data, maybe it means sync some data, or maybe they don't need to do anything with it, they can just ignore it. But by decoupling in this way, you enable your systems to only have to interact with one point. You interact with an event bus rather than interacting with every other system. The systems operate independently. To do this, we introduced platform events. Platform events is the idea of when you have this time-ordered event bus and you're publishing these signals onto it, what are you actually publishing? Publishing some format of data, probably JSON, maybe some other format, but that format itself and that payload that you're sending is what we call a platform event. Now, platform events fall into the same data model and meta model that we have at Salesforce. So if you've ever created a custom object and added custom fields to that custom object, doing that with platform events is very similar. You'll create a platform event object, and you'll create fields for that event. And this kind of sets the schema for those events. So the contract that you have as a client with the event bus is defined in the event shape. So what fields are on this event? What does it mean to you? What does it represent? Now, once you've published this platform event, like I said, another system can listen for it. So for instance, if we needed to do some sort of data synchronization process where if a record changes on the Salesforce side, I want to update SAP and my Oracle systems, well, Salesforce can publish that change event. SAP and Oracle can listen to it independently and then decide what do they do with that event when they receive it. This is actually a process called change data capture. Change data capture is a type of event that we put onto the enterprise bus or the Salesforce event bus. The idea being anytime you change a record in Salesforce, if you update an account, you create a contact, you delete a lead, all of that represents a state change of that data. So what we do is automatically capture it, format it into a platform event, and publish it onto the event bus. Automatically. We will do that all for you. Then any system that needs to stay up to date with Salesforce can just subscribe to that channel and receive this stream of events as they happen in real time. This is very useful for things like I said, I need to, when I change that account name inside of Salesforce, I need to make sure the account name changes in SAP and Oracle. Now, I say we capture all of that on our side, and it's actually very useful in this because that's the heavy lifting. It's very hard to detect when something has changed. You have to look at before values, after values. Do you capture it after all your triggers have run, before your triggers have run? There's a lot of complexity in there. So we take all of that away from you. We just do the capture at the Oracle transaction layer, and we just publish it once the commit has happened. So it's a very straightforward, easy way for you to subscribe to those data changes. And this is really good when you need to do things like keep data in sync. However, there's another pattern here. Keeping data in sync is great, but it means you have 2 or more copies of that data. Anytime you're copying data, as an architect, when you're thinking about this, when I copy data, I have to have some sort of reconciliation process because I have to assume that the data goes bad at some point in time. Maybe it missed an update, maybe some kind of validation ran or didn't run, so I'm going to have to go back and keep it in sync. Now, if you don't want to do all of that, you can do what's called virtualization. You keep the data in one spot, that's your master data. Anybody that needs to see that data looks for it at time of need. So if I need to see an SAP order, I go to SAP and I ask for the order when I need it. Salesforce Connect allows us to do that inside of the Salesforce platform itself. So we can connect to your external data systems. We can request the data at time of need, like when you're looking at a record. And when we receive the data, we can make it look like Salesforce data. So we can fit it into things like page layouts, record views, list views, et cetera. So even though the data doesn't live in Salesforce, you can reach out, bring it in, and your end users will interact with it as if it did live in Salesforce. This is very good for avoiding that duplication nightmare, but it comes with other trade-offs, such as since the data doesn't live in Salesforce, we can't do certain things with it. It's hard to run a trigger or a change detection against it if it's not on our platform. So there are some limitations. Again, this is the trade-off when you're thinking about architecture. As we move outside of the data realm, we start to get into the more process-driven or API-driven realm. External services is kind of our first step in that way. The idea being Salesforce needs to talk to an API that doesn't live on Salesforce, get some information or action something, and then take the result and move forward on the Salesforce side. Great example of this would be if I needed to do some sort of credit check. So I have a record inside Salesforce. I need to take some of that information, call out to an external service and say, hey, is this opportunity valid? Does it pass any kind of due diligence that I can provide through an API? The response I get, if it's yes, I can then move forward on it. Today we can call external services through flows and also through Apex code directly. So you can kind of start to plug in these external services. And the real power of it is that given a contract using Open API or interagent format, we can actually automatically create those API connections for you. So as you're building an API, if you end up with an Open API specification, you can put that specification in Salesforce. We'll then decode it, create this external service, and know how to talk to that endpoint automatically. So you don't have to actually code that up yourself. So a flow could look something like this as we start looking at how do we interact with data that lives partially on Salesforce and partially off of Salesforce. So on the left-hand side, we'll see that we have an order management app. This is built on the Lightning platform. This uses the standard Salesforce data like accounts and projects being a custom object here. But it also has this external object called SAP Orders. This is connected using Salesforce Connect. Now, once it's connected inside of the via Connect, it looks just like any other object at Salesforce. So we can expose it inside of that order management app. When I'm looking at an order, I can see what SAP orders are connected to that Salesforce order. Alternatively, we can also use this credit system, like we see at the top, via an external service. So we can make a call out to a credit system to do some sort of check on the order as we're operating in Salesforce. Now, this model would assume that Salesforce is kind of your front end. This is where your employees are working. Maybe this is where your customers are coming through in a portal. But Salesforce is kind of the glass in this case, the data living somewhere else externally. But there's other options as well, and this is where we come to Heroku. Maybe, for whatever reason, Salesforce just doesn't quite scale the way you want. Maybe you need some sort of elastic compute for certain operations that isn't appropriate in Apex. Maybe you just want to build a really, really scalable app that your customers can hit. A great example we had a couple years ago was Macy's were hosting their online orders through Heroku because it could scale out when they did things like a Thanksgiving Day sale and then get that data back into Salesforce. And we do that by a feature called Heroku Connect. Now, Heroku Connect is Salesforce managed data synchronization. We take all of the data that lives in Salesforce that you want. We automatically move it over into Heroku Postgres, so you can build applications with Heroku, with your data from Salesforce living on Heroku. And then as the data changes, both in Salesforce and in Heroku, we automatically sync that back and forth. So you can keep your data up to date. This is very useful for those use cases, like I said, where you need to build something externally for scale or for specific domain knowledge. Again, if your team is a Node shop and you need to build a Node app, you're not going to build a Node app on Salesforce, but you could build that on Heroku. Using Connect, get your Salesforce data available to that Node app. It also allows you to consolidate Salesforce organization data. How many people in here have more than one Salesforce org? How many of you have tried to share the data between those orgs? How many have been really successful at it? Great, I want to talk to you after, because we haven't, Salesforce Connect. That's definitely one way. You build a hub and spoke model then, right? So the alternative was to use something like Heroku Connect, which is you have this Postgres database, but instead of just syncing one org's data into it, you sync multiple org's data into it. And then you can choose to push that aggregated data set into kind of the central org if you choose. So it's a way to help you do this aggregation without having to really write code. Again, it's a point and click tool. Finally, you can always expose Heroku Connect as external objects as well. External objects can be used through Salesforce Connect, as was mentioned, so that anytime you want to expose something from Heroku into another org or into any OData provider, you can do so. Great example here was T-Mobile. They were able to kind of create one of these unified databases. I believe they had, don't quote me on the number of orgs, so I won't say it, but it was multiple orgs into a single Postgres in order to deliver customer information across geos. So this is kind of the visual of what we just talked about. I have a couple of sales orgs, org 2 and org 3. I have a service org down in the bottom right. Using Heroku Connect, I bring that all into Postgres. I can build any custom apps that I need, any external compute that I need to do aggregation or special calculations. And then I can use Connect to surface that into my main org, which is kind of the central org of everything. So this gives you the ability to do things like faster and more reliable insights into how your data is running. Salesforce is very good at a lot of things. Looking at how your data is modeled and where your data pipelines kind of start to slow down is not our strong suit. This is something where the tooling that's available in Heroku becomes very valuable. So you can start to easily see things like data skew. Do I have a set of accounts that have a ton of child records, which can affect things like queries? It's a point-and-click configuration, and it gives you that ability to extend your CRM data. It's not just limited to the data that you pull out of Salesforce, but once you pull that data out, you can always add more fields to that table if you want and extend it in whatever way you need. So if you are combining multiple data sources together, you can do that in one Postgres table. Finally, we get to MuleSoft. MuleSoft, for those of you that aren't aware, was acquired by Salesforce last year, right about this time, right before DX. And MuleSoft is an API management and an API connectivity solution. They also fit very well into kind of the middleware space of connecting multiple systems together. Now, one of those systems just happens to be Salesforce, which is why it's a really great partnership. So for those instances where you're having to build into your legacy systems, you're building connections into other cloud systems, you want to build a new experience, you can do that on Salesforce. You could do that with Salesforce and Heroku, but it might be a little heavy lifting sometimes. And it really makes it hard to reuse it, especially as you go across boundaries of systems. Now with MuleSoft's Anypoint platform, you're able to really connect this and extend it easily to all of those external systems. MuleSoft has built-in connectors to all of these major vendors, has connectors to Salesforce, can act as that middle point. It's very useful for data movement, but that's really not where MuleSoft, I would even say, shines. That's not their best value, because what they really focus on is how do we deliver the end-to-end experience? How do we help you accelerate your engagement, because it sits in a way where it can talk to everything, and not just talk to it, but then expose APIs in a way that are reusable. So for instance, if we were doing a delivery management app, you'll start to see we can lay in all of these different features of Salesforce, such as the REST API to push data into your CRM data, OData through Salesforce Connect to expose those external objects. We're using API Kit for OData to virtualize the data from, in this case, your back-end vehicle order system into MuleSoft. You're getting financial information and inventory information through AWS and Workday connectors, and all of those feed back into the CRM data. And you'll notice that all of those arrows are actually bidirectional, because MuleSoft can take the data from Salesforce and aggregate it back out as needed. It's also very good at being able to track and trace this information. MuleSoft has a very extensive library on how do we really view the state of our data, how do we see where it's going through, where do we find hotspots in our communication path so that we can focus on fixing it. They do very, very good metering and monitoring capabilities there. And at the end of the day, we really think of MuleSoft as just a way to extend Salesforce. You don't need Salesforce to use MuleSoft, and you don't need MuleSoft to use Salesforce, but together it can really help you accelerate some of these plans and designs that you may be struggling with. An example of this is Pilot Flying J. You may have seen them if you're from the US. They have a lot of the truck stops that you'll see, either Pilot or Flying J. And they were really looking to build a personalized guest experience, a loyalty app for those companies and customers that were coming very often. So how could they easily build that? Because they had a lot of legacy architecture. They're delivering gasoline, and they're delivering kind of a lower level manufacturing almost style of delivery. So how do they accelerate their IT teams to be able to do this when there's legacy systems connected together? With MuleSoft and Heroku, they were actually able to quickly spin this up. MuleSoft connecting to all of these backend systems, getting that data, using Heroku as the dev app plane so that they can actually build the mobile experience they wanted to. And then again, using Heroku Connect and MuleSoft to connect that data back into Salesforce for their CRM tracking. And what did this actually look like? So I've said a couple times during the presentation the idea of system APIs, process APIs, and experience APIs. And this is really kind of the backbone of how MuleSoft looks at the world as well, is how are we building these API networks and these application networks? Because you don't want to just build a point-to-point integration. That's useful for some things, but really you want to build reusable components. So for instance, we have the loyalty domain API, which is a system-level API they built in MuleSoft, and that connects into some of those legacy systems. Now, that's going to connect to their loyalty app so that they can start to build the process of what is loyalty, how do we track when somebody's filled up, when they've spent X dollars, et cetera. But they want to deliver that loyalty experience across multiple channels. They want to be able to push it into Salesforce so that their Salesforce users can actually see a customer's information. They want to also be able to expose it on a mobile app and on a web app. So when you're looking at your own data, you have a consistent experience across different form factors, all using that same core API. Additionally, the customer profile information that comes from Heroku ultimately and surfaced up through. So the idea is, as your developers are working on these system-level APIs, how do we expose the data? You can have another set of developers who are looking at how do we build containable units of work that are kind of reusable. And you have your UI or your experience layer, which is saying, how do we take all of these pieces that have been built up, surface it up into a single experience for our users, and also then when we upgrade it, we get the upgrade across all of our systems. So the sky's the limit with Salesforce and MuleSoft. The results from Flying J, they were able to build the My Pilot mobile app for their reservations and customers. Heroku simplified that app dev and provided them the scalability they needed. And MuleSoft's API-led connectivity really unlocked that data from the backend systems. They were able to experience 2x year-over-year growth from the users of this application, 90% fewer steps when you're doing their mobile fueling. That was one of the apps is they can actually, a driver can come up and say, hey, I'm about to refuel. They'll get a little code that they can enter in at the pump so they don't have to actually pull out a credit card. It can be all automated. And finally, they're up to 2 million active loyalty members. So a very impressive, very heartwarming story of how something so simple as refilling your tank can actually lead into a deep level architecture and integration story. So with that, hopefully we have about 5 minutes left. Any questions you have? I know that this is kind of a big topic. It's really hard to dive really deep into a lot of these things. There's a mic right here, or if you can shout really loud.
One question about Heroku versus MuleSoft. Do you really need Heroku?
No, none of these things are needed for anything. They work better together in certain ways, but it's...
What's the best use case for Heroku in the data?
In what we just saw?
Yeah.
The best use case is if I have a development team that wants to build a standalone app that isn't appropriate for Salesforce Lightning, right? If I want to just build a new app or a new web experience, but I need to use the Salesforce data, Heroku Connect and the Heroku Dev platform fit that very well. MuleSoft wouldn't be where you're hosting, an app itself. Okay.
What is the roadmap for the Salesforce Connect versus MuleSoft? Does MuleSoft have the capability to connect the Salesforce?
MuleSoft does, absolutely. So MuleSoft can act as both a subscriber to a Connect stream, as an OData subscriber, and as an OData producer. So one of the common stories we see with MuleSoft, even before we acquired them, was they would connect to multiple backend systems and multiple orgs and surface a single Connect endpoint to a central org. So that's there today and available. So when we look at MuleSoft, like I said, we're not trying to go down a road where we say you have to have MuleSoft in order to use the Salesforce features. So we still operate independently. So we are delivering Salesforce Connect for all of our customers who aren't joint MuleSoft customers, but we also want to make sure that we're pairing with MuleSoft very closely so that there's incentive to move to MuleSoft. Things like easier connectivity, easier setup, better limit controls, things like that. Any other questions?
One thing that kind of scares me about external objects or limits on external objects, can you talk about those there a little bit?
Do you have a specific limit that scares you?
Like the example you gave about querying orders,
Yeah.
orders databases, that there's limits of like 10,000 records for
Sure. Sure. So for most of Connect, this is really about delivering an experience, a customer experience, right? So I'm a user. I want to see SAP orders. Let's just take that really simple example. Now, if you're trying to load more than 10,000 records into a single Salesforce view, that's not a good experience. So we can increase that. A lot of those limits we can increase. We tend not to unless there's a really valid business need. And so before we just blanket increase it, we really like to talk to the customer to see what are you trying to do, what is the experience, because we don't want you to end up building something that just doesn't work well, and then your customers or your users don't adopt it and they say, oh, Salesforce is too slow, things like that. But we can raise a lot of those limits. The biggest limits that we have are things like how long we can keep a query running. So if the backend system that we're connecting to is very, very slow, we can't hold a connection open forever. So we have a 2-minute max window on that, things like that.
So for a basic use case, like if you had an order number and the database had millions of records, it's okay to use an external object in that use case because it's searching for one particular record?
Yep. Or if you had something like, usually what we see is I'll load up an account and it will show me all of the orders from that account, right? So you're really talking about scoping down that request on the wire. There's also ways that we are looking at things, $expand, which is one of the OData reference points that allows you to do multi-object and bring down whole sets of records. We're expanding in that way too. So we're constantly looking to see how we can manage those limits while still providing the right balance of experience. Now, if there's specific limits, please feel free. We reach out. We can talk about that too. Any other questions?
In your integration at any layers, like you're talking about the data API, can you give me an example?
A data API? So the Salesforce core SOAP API, right? So when I need to create 100 accounts, that would be one of those core data APIs. Our bulk API and our REST API would be other examples. So it's really the lowest level of interacting with the data, right? Probably got one more. Okay.
So what is the performance issues between these two scenarios? Can you use the same connect or I can use the code, get some piece of code, to integrate logs?
I'm not sure if I caught it. So you're using connected apps.
Connect app configuration
Uh-huh.
from the source and target. Target I want to get all the information from the source logs basically. So I give a connect app configuration from the target log to the source logs. With the integration to the API availability slowly. And with the connect app information from the source logs, so that I can bring those data back to the target log. So what is the, instead of using exception handling, how the performance is going to be?
Oh, okay. So at the end of the day, we're moving the same amount of data. The difference is, do you do it in kind of a batch mode before and synchronize the data, or do you just look for it at time of need? I would say so the performance would probably be roughly the same, but the use cases would be slightly different. So it's kind of hard to compare the performance on two different use cases if you're talking about data synchronization versus data virtualization. I could be missing something, so we can chat outside in just a second. With that, I do want to thank everybody. I hope the rest of your Trailhead DX is enjoyable and that you enjoy the rest of the city. Thanks again.